got really sassy in 2021. Pardon my bad pun over there. Now, if you notice, in 2021, SaaS, of course, became a big focus point. It happened all through the pandemic, actually. And we at ET Now and Startup Central have started to not do interviews just based around fundraisers, because let's face it, in this era of excessive liquidity, every day we get so many press releases about so many wonderful founders and startups raising money. But our guest today is really special. They're based out of San Francisco. It's a SaaS company, but it's to do with healthcare. And that's something we need to talk a lot more about, something that got exposed by COVID-19. The company I'm talking about is Innovaccer, which has raised another $150 million at a valuation of $3.5 billion. Joining us all the way from San Francisco, Silicon Valley, is Abhinav, the co-founder of Innovaccer. Hi, Abhinav. Thanks so much for giving us this interview, and also for being all out at all kind of odd hours to accommodate us. Tell us more about the fundraise and why this is a big one, and why you've seen such a big jump in valuation.
Thanks, Tara, firstly for having us here and having us talk about what we are sort of doing. As you rightly pointed out, I think every other industry has gone through massive change. The way banking has sort of evolved, the way transportation has evolved, the way retail has evolved. We've seen every industry sort of go through this massive digital transformation. We are accessing all of these industries on our mobile phones. We are doing basically things with them more digitally. But healthcare hasn't basically been one of these industries where digital transformation has basically occurred. We still go to our doctor, and the first thing we do is to write on a piece of paper our names and our basic healthcare information. That's the state of healthcare in most places across the world. And so the need of technology and the adoption of technology in healthcare is of paramount importance over the next few years, and that basically came to the fore, as you basically said, in this COVID times in general. So we've seen that sort of happen. We are building cloud technology for healthcare providers, payers, and life sciences to be able to offer services more digitally and enable them to sort of drive this digital transformation in the industry as well.
So, during the pandemic, we also saw the Indian government try and do just this, right? We have the National Digital Health Mission. It's supposed to be open source. It invites APIs to just digitize healthcare, not to just make it contactless, but also to have blockchains with our health records, etc. So sitting out of Silicon Valley, given your Indian roots, with the kind of access you have to investors at your cap table, give us a sense of what's happening in India. Are you guys innovating for India as well?
Yeah. No, I think the Indian government has taken such incredible steps towards moving the digital health landscape forward in general, setting up a framework on what healthcare technology is basically going to mean in India, and setting up technology and data standards upfront is a big leap forward. I think most developed economies sort of made this mistake of not setting up these technological standards earlier, and therefore you see a mess of all of these different systems that were built on different technology structures in general, which has cost a lot of money for now these governments to generally recreate these standards and have everyone sort of adopt it now. And the way India has basically gone about it, whether that's in financial services and doing the UPI, and now in healthcare really setting up these standards and creating an open ecosystem for digital health, it's just going to go such a long way. And we've been very active participants in some of these standard creation processes through the SWAST program and other areas, and we think this is just going to be one of those areas that is just going to explode over the next few years.
Yeah, but you're sitting out of Silicon Valley, right? You've got your Indian roots. We all celebrate all of that. But the question I really want to ask you is, tell us a bit of the exciting innovations that you're really seeing around healthcare and SaaS, whether it is at your firm or other firms, because you can really tell us what's going on.
Yeah. No, I think healthcare is basically going to change like on its head, right? Like today, basically, like we go to the doctor when we are sick, right? Like that's basically reactive care for you. But now, basically, with all of these devices coming in, like all of us are basically starting to wear Fitbits and like all of these like fancy devices that take health information out of us and really get them to the cloud, and which therefore basically like makes us jump into this era of proactive care. Like before you get sick, the doctor and like your care team sort of like starts to know that either your blood pressure is increasing, your weight is increasing, and therefore like you are now at a high risk of diabetes, you are at a high risk of like heart failure. And if that intervention was made like 15 days earlier, you are now basically like a healthy person with a changed diet plan rather than someone who is in a hospital bed being treated for heart failure. That amount of change in some way, like from moving from reactive care to proactive care, is just going to happen like in every disease area and every category over the next few years. And I think like as that sort of like happens, technology is basically going to play like such a pivotal role, and data is basically going to be at the center of everything that sort of like gets created in proactive care.
So what are you talking about? Isn't that already happening? For example, if I've got, give an example, an Apple Watch, it'll alert me that you're there's something wrong with the heart. Is that the kind of stuff you're talking about?
That's like at the very basic end of it, right? Like you can basically monitor a lot of these things over a continuous period of time and send an alert to your doctor about like these are like 5 patterns that are happening, right? Like there is an element of the doctor's judgment that's involved in a lot of these things. You go to the doctor, talk about the same symptoms, and they tell you should basically be on this medication and this kind of like care plan in general, rather than that. Now basically you will have like all kind of like devices sort of like sending them data, and if you can process that and say that like this patient is at a high risk of diabetes, this patient is at a high risk of heart failure, this patient is at a high risk of arthritis, this patient is at a high risk of any chronic condition, that basically means that the doctors can get involved in your care in a lot more longitudinal way, and they're not just reacting when you're sick, and really like taking care of you at all points of time, and therefore like this change in care delivery is just going to be like very fundamental. Today we don't basically like see it, we see like these tiny alerts that yes, like your blood pressure has basically like gone down, but there's no medical advice associated with it. And if you basically like start bringing these things back to the doctor and therefore then sort of like drive medical advice with it, there is so much behavior change that you can drive with patients, and all of us can basically be living healthier and longer lives for sure.
Absolutely, and here we need a lot more to be done, because still now in India what we're really understanding of digitization of healthcare is still telemedicine, and as Abhinav is just explaining to us, we've only scratched the surface. Abhinav, it's a big day when it comes to the fundraise, and I'd like to thank you for taking the time out for joining us here on ET Now.
Thank you so much.